Good evening and welcome to the channel. I'm Brian Lusk. Thank you very much for joining me today. Glad to have you here. We've got a lot of stuff that's been going on the last 2 days, almost 3 days in Ukraine and Russia. And let me tell you, some of it's pretty amazing. I was trying to get some last second additional information from Sandbox News on the Su-57 fighter that we're about to start talking about in just a moment here. But obviously I ran just a little bit out of time. So I might have to, if I can get the opportunity, I'll drop that link in for you guys to watch as well. Glad to have you here, by the way. Go ahead and chime in as you get logged in and join up here. Luciano, glad to have you as always. And I'll look forward to everybody else joining as well. Let's go ahead and get started talking about this Su-57 because this is the pretty big news of the day. We'll start off with Russian Air Force affiliated channel Fighter Bomber makes the story about the damaged Su-57 even better. Not one, but two Su-57s were damaged. Now, at this point, we can't treat that truly as confirmed. We've only got visual evidence of one. But overall, usually a fighter bomber is talking about multiples. It's usually pretty accurate because he doesn't like talking about any. So it looks like we've got confirmation on this, at least from the Russian side so far. Andrei Yusov from the Ukrainian Ministry of Intelligence stated that there was preliminary information. There may be two, but so far they're only really talking about one. Yeah, the Su-57 is known for being, it's not quite so stealth fighter aircraft. It's also the dubious distinction, I might add, of the first combat loss of a fifth generation fighter. Not been any F-22s or F-35s have been dropped in combat so far. Now, we have launched a few off the end of an aircraft carrier and into the ocean, but that's one thing. That's not the same thing as what we got going on here. Robbie, glad to have you here as well. I've kind of set up with a couple of cameras here because every once in a while I like to have the option to maybe switch over here and then talk about something I'm going to put up here on the screen at the same time. But most often I use this setup, and it's kind of fun to just get that extra dimension in there. Continuing on about the Su-57, by the way, thank you. This attack took place at Oktyabinsk Air Base in the Astrakhan region. This is almost 600 kilometers from the current front lines. About 589, as I recall, is the exact number. But you'll note a few things about these pictures if we take a closer look. What you don't see, while you don't see things like, hangars. There's a minimal amount of barrier between the planes that are lined up here. Now, they did, as I recall, have some painted, lines on here, like they might expect something to happen. But with all these vehicles parked outside, all they had to do was put it somewhere on the flight line, and the odds are they would have put it on the apron, and the odds are they would have managed to hit one of these aircraft. Now, this, clearly with no protection at all, it's clear that Russia never really expected Ukraine to be able to reach out and touch someone at this distance, at this location. And yet, Ukraine's been regularly reaching out and touching targets as much as 1,000 kilometers and more away in Russia. So, just another miscalculation on the part of the Russians. You can see if with a closer look here, the burning marks around the Su-57 looks like they started to erect a some kind of a cage or something like that near the aircraft. Though this looks more like it might be, I can't really tell what this is. It just looks weird. But even so, you can see the nose of the aircraft and the tail of the aircraft are sticking out of whatever this cage is. So not exactly the most robust coverage from drone attacks, obviously. This may make it a little bit more clear. We've got the picture on the 7th and then the picture on the 8th with the burn marks around it. The damage is not necessarily lethal at this point in time to the aircraft itself. There were some reports, I believe, of some additional personnel that were injured or killed on the base. But overall, the explosions around the aircraft likely perforated it in many ways. And if they do bring it back online, that's what Sandbox News Alex Hollings was talking about when I had to pause that to jump back in. The odds are it probably perforated enough, and they'll have to take one of the hand-built prototypes of this aircraft to repair this one to get it back into service, if it can be repaired at all. Now, I've seen varying numbers as to exactly how many are operational, all the way from 12 to 20. I've even seen numbers as low as 8. I'm not quite on board with the 8 number, but suffice to say, there are not a lot of these out there. There are hundreds of F-35s, as I recall, in service already across multiple nations. So the Su-57, they're not bringing this one back that easily. The interesting thing is that these aircraft were being used in the war in Ukraine, but they were lobbing missiles and bombs from well outside the coverage envelope of Ukrainian air defenses, which should indicate exactly how confident the Russians are in the stealthiness and capability of their Su-57 aircraft. The word is that, at least the numbers I saw, was that the Su-57 was kind of stealthy, and nothing compared to an F-22 or even an F-35, which had much smaller radar cross sections. They do have this picture stating that this is the plane that was hit. Obviously, this would be before it actually took the damage, but still, at least we're kind of seeing some information on this and confirmation. I don't have good confirmation on the 2 aircraft potentially being damaged, mainly because there's no video or pictorial evidence. That said, with fighter bomber and multiple other sources all saying basically the same thing, the odds are 2 aircraft were damaged. One of them, or even both, may be entire write-offs. The Russians were not happy with the results. The Su-57, a promising new Russian aircraft, was damaged by Ukrainian forces, they said. The price of this not yet serial product is astronomical. In addition, flight tests cannot be carried out on it yet. They are using them, so this is just the Russians talking about things. This means that the enemy, using drones, managed to somewhat slow down the introduction of a new generation aircraft into the Russian army. The latest multi-billion-dollar development without cover, without camouflage. While there is a full-scale war at the front, and everyone in the rear, including officials of military departments, lives according to relaxed peacetime laws, it is unlikely that this will be avoided in the future. So that's the Russian perspective on the loss of a Su-57, potential loss, I should say, of a Su-57, because I want to make sure I am precise about how I express these things. But that is big news. That's the first of these Su-57s that have been taken out, and it wasn't even in the air at the time. Let's move on to the information out of Ukraine. That's what's going on over there. This is a study, or survey, I should say, that was taken. It says around 50% of Ukrainians think it is important to criticize the government's actions even during the war. But the criticism should be constructive and not destabilize the situation. I found this to be a very American mindset almost, because even during the height of war, when there are patriots abounding that are professing the greatest of love, there are always those who have comments about how things are being done, that have comments about the functioning of government, and potentially about how things could be better. So, interesting mindset, and glad to see it. Local authorities in Sumy Oblast have stated there will be no farming in the areas close to the Russian borders, but you know how that goes. If you've ever met a farmer, you know right off the bat that they don't like being told what to do. Farmers are a hardy lot that like to do what they believe is right, and there ain't no government that's going to tell them what to do if they don't want to be told to do it. So they're having some hard time keeping the farmers away from their land, and who can blame them? It's their source of income. The problem being, of course, that if you're farming that land and it turns out that the Russians have decided that it's a good place to mine, well, you might not enjoy the fruits of your labor, we'll just say. Now, this is information on the F-16 fighter fleet. I'm going to kind of pull back for a second here and talk about the overall situation with F-16s. The U.S. has a limited capacity to actually train F-16 pilots. The Ukrainians are absolutely livid about this. There are other nations that can also train, but this point in time, the U.S. capability to train is about 12 pilots I believe it's per year, but a total of 12 at a time. And there are a couple other countries that can do 8 and that type of thing. But the planes are coming. It's going to take some time. Ukraine, however, discussed their plans to protect their fighter fleet by basing planes in other countries. Now, this does not mean they'll be flying combat sorties out of Germany or Poland or anything like that. No, what this means is that the aircraft that are not currently assigned to a pilot will be stored in a non-Ukrainian location outside of the borders of Ukraine. And then when they need to bring that in to replace a damaged or destroyed airframe, they pop a pilot over the border, he jumps in the plane, he flies over, and now that plane can be landed, refueled, and armed, and sent on its next combat sortie. So that's what's going on with that. Russia, of course, screamed about that for a little while. But if you read between the lines very carefully, you'll realize that what Russia was saying is that if those planes do combat directly from those countries, then Russia will feel justified to attack those airfields and those locations directly, even if they are in third-party or even NATO countries. But that's not the plan that Ukraine has in play. In addition, Ukraine's getting extra creative. They are now domestically producing JDAM-ER UPMK extended range glide bombs. And that is according to a Ukrainian Air Force brigadier general. That's quite the advance for Ukraine. They've got a certain amount of limits on their ability to do large-scale manufacturing right now, especially with all the damage to their power infrastructure. But even so, they know that if they build it themselves, they don't have to worry about getting Mother May I permission from the United States for it. Now, okay, hold 1 second for me. I got to do a quick research here because I didn't have time to check this out before I started. Okay. That's not going to tell me anything fast. This is a Ukrainian soldier holding a U.S.-supplied M2A4 15-pound shaped demolition charge. This is going to be converted for use. In fact, as you can see, it already has, for use as a drone-dropped munition. Could you imagine 15 pounds of explosives dropping on your head? Well, you wouldn't have to imagine for long. The M2A4 was originally created for boring holes in earth, metal, masonry, concrete, and both paved and unpaved roads. Quite the up in the firepower that are being hauled aloft by those Baba Yaga drones. Some bad news and some good news out of Ukraine. The Ukrainian Air Force Su-27 Frogfoots have run out of unguided munitions. However, they've now modified the Su-25s to carry French-supplied AASM extended-range guided bombs. Now, the French have a limited capacity to produce these bombs, as I understand. 50 per month is kind of the number I've seen in a few places. Can't absolutely vouch for it, but interesting. That still means that they've modified yet another Russian aircraft to carry Western weapons that it was never, ever, ever designed to use. So good on the Ukrainians for keeping the creativity going. Yes, a shaped charge, Aussie, it would not be a good day for you. Now, this comes from Bloomberg, although Tindar is talking about it. Putin is running out of time, and that applies to his entire rule. Every time the West decides to help Ukraine with another large package, Russia is getting out of balance. The most telling part is that Ukraine performs beyond expectations, even with one hand bound to the back, denying Russia any strategic gain and killing scores of Russian men. This is an interesting perspective, and Bloomberg, of course, ran with the article here. I don't have the original article handy. Uh, it's an interesting perspective. And in some ways, I can see where they're coming from. The thing is that there was 6 months where Ukraine had to fight with very limited amounts of Western assistance, as aid from the U.S. was heavily restricted, if not stopped outright. And in that 6 months, how much did Russia actually do? Not much. They made nibbles, and that's kind of what they're still doing now. Is they're getting nibbles. They're getting nibbles in the south, nibbles in the east. But their big offensive in Kharkiv, which was intended to truly change how things were going on the battlefield, it's being pushed back. And we'll talk about that in a bit. The thing is that I think this is a multi-aspect running out of time here. If Vladimir Putin cannot start delivering real effect on the battlefield, as in really break through, get some real territory, he may find that the people back in Russia, not the people, but the oligarchs, are going to get impatient. And Xi Jinping also is kind of getting impatient, most likely. Though from his perspective, if you think about it from China's perspective for a moment, he's looking at the entirety of the West, kind of use up their equipment and their firepower and send it to Ukraine. And then, of course, it's also draining both the Russian equipment supplies and their ability to manufacture. But there are aspects there that are going to backfire in this regard. Specifically, since the West has been pretty much letting their armaments factories basically sit fallow for a while, it's almost been hard to bring them back online. Well, now they've built a new ammunition plant in the U.S. that's making 155 millimeter artillery shells. They're going to make a new plant I don't remember where right now, that's going to pack those shells with explosives and do the final assembly. We're ramping up. And China is probably looking at this and realizing that if this situation in Ukraine keeps going much longer, they may find that the West has realized exactly what kind of ways they can cut China out so that they can effectively engage China in extended warfare. So there's a lot of people that are looking at this situation and running exactly where the balance is. Aussie states, what amazes me is that Putin has decided to keep on pushing. I would be more concerned were he to freeze the conflict and for the West to forget and wait for the West to forget or become distracted. That is a serious, that's a serious question. The thing is that Vladimir Putin, here's kind of just my first thought right off the top of my head. Vladimir Putin could afford to wait if he can convince the West to put a freeze on the front lines. But he can't afford to wait because the West isn't biting. He would love to have time to rebuild his forces and come back stronger. But so far, the West has not bitten on the bait. Let's move over to Russia. Russia started using submarines to patrol the Black Sea after a number of ships were attacked by Ukraine. It's a lot harder to target the submarine because it's underwater and a lot harder to see. Plus, many of them are also missile launchers as well, so they can do dual purpose activity. We'll have to see if Ukraine has a counter for it. If you're from Africa and you're in Russia trying to get your education, well, Russia has a deal for you. That's right. They're going to round you up, take you to the military enlistment office and say, you could either go to jail because we have now canceled your visa, or you can go to the front line in Ukraine. Now, this is from Crimean Wind. They state that Russia has successfully defended the Yaroslavl region from a drone attack, saying that 3 Ukrainian drones attempted to attack an oil refinery in the Yaroslavl region. But there was a 4th attack, and I was not able to find information on exactly what the results of that attack were. So this could either be sarcasm, saying, yeah, you finally missed, or it could be the truth that that Russia has managed to so far protect that refinery. I don't have good information beyond that, but I thought the graphic was cute. Russian hackers who are against the government of Russia have been seeking to overthrow the Putin regime and have had great successes in striking government targets in Russia and Belarus. They are promising big news soon, but I don't really broke with the whole big news coming, especially when it comes to digital hacking of this sort. Now, they are kind of cheeky guys. They're basically offering to trade. They could trade what they have already recovered, showing some of the corruption going on, for more information that they might actually like, or they could get payments from the people who are being corrupt in order to not leak that information. So these hackers definitely are looking for ways to fund their activities. According to the Ukrainian naval spokesperson, the Russian anti-submarine ship Admiral Levchenko is on fire in the Barents Sea. This was earlier today. Have not received any further information on this or pictures. I'm reporting it mainly as a possibility. That appears that Ukraine is not claiming any connection to it other than knowing about it. There were several hundred crew members on the ship, and that the problem was a malfunction with one of the engines. But again, there's no confirmation. It's just multiple sources all talking about the same thing. I don't have good confirmation, so I'm not going to make it say it's absolutely true. Two of Vladimir Putin's daughters spoke at the education forum, as I recall, maybe indicating that they might be kind of in line as successors to Vladimir Putin. And if you look at it from Vlad's perspective, it might be his best chance of actually having a successful post-dictatorship, where he might be able to hand off the reins to somebody who can take care of the country, and he can while away his twilight years in calm and peace. But this is the problem is that this is not exactly how things work in Russia. There's a lot of strong people over there that have their eye on Vladimir Putin's job. And for instance, Kadyrov might be in that same position. But watch out. Russian Z channels report 10 T-34-85 tanks have been brought to Belarus, and they are intended to take part in the parade in Minsk on July 3rd. And I found this interesting. In particular, I found that the Belarusian army's comment here was really telling. The T-34 tanks, which, by the way, would be just barely post-World War II with the T-34-85. In fact, some actually served in World War II. As I recall, the T-34 tanks, which arrived from the Russian Federation, are in excellent technical condition and are ready not only to march solemnly at the parade, but also to perform a combat task if necessary. We have joked so many times about the possibility of Russians rolling out T-34 tanks from World War II as to boost up their existing combat units. Now they've actually found 10 of them and got them into operational condition for a parade. And then they're making these statements. Why didn't they have these in time for the Victory Day parade, is all I'm going to ask. Just saying. Also, Belarus would be closer to Ukraine, at least the areas that they might want to suddenly invade. But don't worry, the Russians will, of course, gaslight all of us, stating, we didn't do anything bad to anyone, according to Valentina Matvienko, the chairwoman of the Federation Council of the Russian Federation. We didn't attack anyone. And now you know why they called it a special military operation for so long. So they can also claim that they never attacked anybody. Yeah. There were some Ukrainian ATACMS ballistic missile strikes reporting in the Nomivka area in Russian-occupied Crimea, causing a power outage roughly 20 kilometers south of that area. There's a lot more going on in Crimea. This one just stood out as being mostly a power situation. But there's a lot more that I'll be talking about when we get to the situation on the front lines. Solovyev, another Russian propagandist, showed the destroyed Vovchansk and promised to do the same to the cities of Germany. The thing is that this is basically a direct threat by the Russian Federation. They're stating that they will destroy Germany. This is their escalatory rhetoric. Going back to the Russian A-50 that was shot down a couple of months ago, the two of them were shot down. The report now is that that operation was carried out with Patriot systems. They really prevaricated on this for a while, saying it was S-200s. But the main reason I'm pointing this out is that they came up with a new term I've never heard. Sambush. Ambush with a Sam. I laughed. I thought that was hilarious. So anyway, it appears that that shoot down was actually done with a Patriot system. Interesting. Very interesting indeed. Russians have been, well, mad about it, but a little bit muted. That was a red line that has long since passed, and therefore they're just not really worried about it. That said, fighter bomber, the Russian source there, reports that the effectiveness of guided bombs is declining because electronic warfare systems on both sides are getting more effectively, which is significantly impacting the accuracy of the bombs. A drone made it all the way to North Ossetia, Russia, more than 700 kilometers from Ukrainian army positions. Small arms fire was tried to bring it down. The thing about this is that this is not the airbase that the Su-57s were at, and it's believed that this drone was heading to someplace else along the way. No word on exactly where it might have been because it was brought down, as I recall. That's not important. We'll just pass that by. Russia finally banned the Russian Chess Federation from the International Chess Federation. Russia was finally banned by the International Chess Federation. So that means that, the Russian chess masters, who they tend to have pretty good ones actually, will not be welcome in the international realm anymore. Let's move over to Mozdok. And now I'm going to mention this one. This, I believe, might have been where that drone in North Ossetia was, because there was a drone strike at Mozdok Military Airfield in North Ossetia. But I couldn't confirm it was the same drone, so that's the reason I left it separated. At least one drone successfully hit Russia's Mozdok Air Base this morning, impacting the eastern airfield. This is the home of Russian Tu-22 M3 strategic bombers. No word on whether there was any damage in this attack. This was reported 2 days ago, so my gut feel is that there was no significant damage carried out because there's been no post-damage analysis yet. Let's move over to the international front. And as I'm going into international, feel free to ask questions because we got some funny things going on right here, and you might find some of them interesting or have questions. I'll be willing and able to drop back and talk about some of them some more. Belarus has offered to participate in Russia's next set of nuclear drills that'll be coming up soon. Belarus will participate in the second stage of Russian drills simulating the launch of tactical nuclear weapons. So don't expect that to really be any better than the previous ones, but we'll keep an eye on it. The Netherlands and Denmark will contribute 400 million euros in a Swedish fund to build CV-90 infantry fighting vehicles for Ukraine. They're very well liked over there in Ukraine. Them and the Bradleys are very much some of the backbone of Ukraine's military right now that effectively destroy the military and save the crew if they are hit. Presidents Macron and Biden have agreed on the use of profits from frozen Russian assets for Ukraine. This is a follow-up on that whole weird loan situation and the Russian assets and all that kind of stuff. So apparently they have come to an agreement on this, and we should see that starting soon. Actually, we'll see the official announcement on June 14th. Finland has been sending their experimental stuff and developmental weapon systems over to Ukraine, and he said, when asked if their performance in Ukraine was good, he responded, yes, there would be more demand for them. The Netherlands and Germany will build a joint European production line for Patriot missiles. This line will be set up in Germany, and the project has the go-ahead from the U.S. We are now in a war situation, and everybody needs their Patriot missiles now. French-supplied Mirage 2000-5s will be supplied to Ukraine after they've been modified by Dassault Aviation to carry the British and French Scalp or Storm Shadow missiles. That way the work can be done before it ever gets into Ukraine, and they'll be ready to go out of the box. This is not directly related to the war in Ukraine, but I think it might have been inspired by it. China has been rounding up their old MiG-19 fighters and taking them into certain areas. And the theory where these aircraft are going is that they are stripping them down and turning them into unmanned guided missiles. This includes potentially modernizing the aircraft and installing the remote control capabilities. So it looks like even China's watching what's going on in Ukraine and saying, we better get on board that before it gets too much farther. Russia's advanced Yasin-M class nuclear submarine is headed towards Cuba. In fact, they're going to be making a port of call in Cuba. I believe they may have arrived today. I caught a blurb on that earlier, and they may have already arrived. This Russian Navy flotilla making its way to Cuba for exercises will be a great opportunity for U.S. forces to collect signals intelligence as they operate. So thank you, Vladimir Putin, for sending your ships over. I'm certain our intelligence guys are salivating at the opportunities that this will present. Also, not directly related to the war in Ukraine, there was a hostage rescue taking place in Gaza, where they freed 4 of the hostages that were taken by Hamas. This was very interesting to me, mainly because it turned out that these hostages were being housed with civilian families. One of them was even a doctor who had 3 of the hostages in his house. Hamas has been throwing a fit, as well as other people, that the IDF killed a bunch of people. By and large, though, if you don't want to have civilians killed when the enemy comes to rescue their hostages, maybe don't put them in civilian houses and amongst civilian population. And kind of, again, not related, but you can just kind of see the overall pattern in the world. South Korea is resuming loudspeaker broadcasts along the demilitarized zone as of June 8th. This indicates that stresses and tensions are getting to a fever pitch, and nations are starting to look at each other and go, I'm worried. I got some things to be really concerned about here. Already talked about the F-16s for a bit. 3 Russian agents were arrested in Paris for graffiti of French soldiers in Ukraine in coffins. I believe, and I've kind of read this a few different places, I believe the individuals involved were from Moldova. They didn't specify whether it was from the Transnistria area or not, but this is basically just more psyops going on from the Russian perspective. House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman McCall said the prohibition of ATACMS strikes inside Russia defies congressional intent and urges the Biden administration to comply. McCall also urges the administration to supply Ukraine with real-time targeting intelligence. So once again, we see that some people are calling for even greater allowances for Ukraine, and the Biden administration is holding back in many ways. Considering that these types of calls for additional allowances for Ukraine are bipartisan, I don't know how long that Biden will hold out in refusing them. Elections took place in Europe, with many of the parties in power finding that they have been pretty well shellacked in this round of elections, and as they say, far right parties. I'm just putting that in quotes. That's what they say, not me. Are gaining some additional strength. This is interesting to keep an eye on. European politics did this level. There's just a little bit. I don't have a good grasp on it just yet. But Tendar states that this was a good election for Europe, for the West, and for NATO. The losses for the Greens are the most remarkable development and the clearest sign that the government coalition is at its logical end. And this is because the Green leadership did not stand up to Schultz in his timid response in regard to Ukraine. They're talking specifically about Germany. Over in France, the Macron's party did get kind of shellacked as well. So he has immediately dissolved parliament and called for a snap election. Now, a lot of people are making a lot of hay about this, but this is a fairly traditional or normal thing in a parliamentary system. Either it's done to potentially give the people their voice in their new government on that particular aspect, or it can sometimes be a power play to try and show the people or show the rest of the world that your government still has a strong mandate to continue to rule. This could backfire on Macron, and it could be Le Pen. I think it was Le Pen would be the replacement if it goes bad. But overall, should be interesting to keep an eye on. Dimitri with War Translated states, I see nothing particularly worrying with the results of the European Parliament elections. In my view, they were expected. The right-wing movement in Western Europe, which has been growing in popularity over the past decade, is now materializing its aspirations. There are still enough sensible people in Western Europe, but more balance is needed. Then he talks about Hungary. The outcome in Hungary is more encouraging. The ruling Fidesz party recorded its worst result in history, 44%, as I recall, as opposed to every other election where they've had over 50%. This is a reality that autocrat Orban will have to face. Putin's ally is rapidly losing support, which is a cause for celebration. Eastern European nations should strive for unity in the face of Russian danger. Peter Magyar, a 43-year-old lawyer and once an ally of Orban, is actually his opposition now and has gained an increasing number of supporters since earlier this year. Now, just so we're clear, at 44%, Orban is in no risk of immediately losing his job or anything else like that. However, the mandate of his party has been severely restricted by doing so. They may have the most votes, but they don't have enough votes to run roughshod over the rest of the nation. There was an absolutely huge anti-Russia rally in Budapest as well, with thousands who are not happy with Orban turning the country into an impoverished Russian colony. And this is an even better view of it, which I think I can get this a little bigger for you. You can see how enormous these crowds are. This huge opposition rally in Hungary to protest against Orban's populist, anti-EU, and pro-Kremlin regime. As Dmitry states, Putin's ally must be having nightmares. This next section I'm calling sabotage, and I think you'll see why in just a moment. An explosion was reported at the Polish arms factory, where a 59-year-old man was among the victims, and the explosion took place in the factory's rocket fuel center. They're still investigating, but this is part of a continuing pattern of suspicious incidents at arms manufacturing facilities in Europe. There have also been some incidents over in the U.S. as well, where I live, that have been also similarly unusual. Anton Herischenko gave a little bit more information, saying it was the Mesko arms plant in Poland. The fire has been extinguished with the investigation in progress. This is also reported to be the contractor responsible for producing man pads and anti-tank missiles. With so this could be a significant impact, as they're also being produced for Ukraine as well. Daniel Kokis, I don't know his exact pronunciation of his name, did write an article about Russia's shadow war against the West gaining momentum. And the thing is that it's pretty clear this is a shadow war that that is being basically taken out against the West, because Vladimir Putin knows that if he tried to directly attack the West right now, he's already stripped his air defenses off of various areas, which we'll be talking about some more. He's stripped down his military to mostly send to Ukraine. So there's very little that's actually standing on the borders. Literally, the only thing that's stopping NATO from waltzing right into Russia right now, well, besides the fact that NATO has morals, is is Vladimir Putin's nuclear weapons. They know if they waltz across the border, they're going to get nuked. So that's why NATO's never going to waltz across that border. String of mysterious attacks from the Telegraph across Europe opens new front in Russia's war on the West. So I'm just going to go ahead and paste the link here if you want to jump in on that action and kind of see what's going on. But overall, we're seeing a pattern of continued sabotage and strange attacks that have been taking place at vital military facilities across Europe and the United States. That takes me to the front lines. Now, there's not a whole lot of changes here for today. I've got a few more details. For today's stuff, we've got a little bit of an advance near Novopokrovsk. You get that popped up here so you can kind of see. All open territory leading up to the tiny village. Staromayorsk, it looks like Russia may have actually captured this village. Now, you might remember this from the summer offensive last year, where Ukrainian forces managed to actually push down, and we were talking about them potentially taking Zavitny Bazania. But at this point, the Russians have managed to push back and basically put it back to its starting lines from that part of the war there. And that's part of their intention, is they want to make it look like Ukraine cannot actually successfully hold ground. This is, I think, part of the results of the Kharkiv offensive, where Ukrainian forces had to be diverted from areas that are a little bit tricky right now. Over at Ivanivske, the last bit of it was captured by Russia as well. This is a decent-sized little town, maybe you could call it. A little bit bigger than a village. It's just continuing as they've continued outside of Bakhmut. And that's the only major changes from Deep State Map. We can look at some of the other things. This is the advances in Soledar, where the Russians had gotten closer to Rozdalivka and Mykolivka. So we can see these kind of just gradual bites and advances as they go. Kislivka, I should say. We mentioned that one already. Chasiv Yar is continuing to be a bit of a situation here, with geolocated footage confirming the Russian forces have increased their presence just east of Chasiv Yar. So there's a lot of fighting going on in this area over here. Another small advance into mostly open area outside of Umansk. I already talked about that, so I can just move on. I got some duplication here today. Here's Staromayorsk. You can kind of see that the Russians have managed to basically move into the village itself. Ukraine control map basically confirms this information overall, so we're not going to go into this in detail. Same thing with Wargonzo, but I'm going to state something here. Wargonzo has gotten to the point where they're spinning things just a little bit more on the Kremlin side. And you can see it in the way they're reporting this. They talk about continuing to fight in areas and cleanup continuing in areas. And instead of actually talking about areas they're gaining in. So there's concerns. I'm starting to see indications of concerns. Will it pan out in the end? I don't know. But overall, the general overall picture that Wargonzo provides is basically along the lines of what we've already discussed. and just confirmation that Staromayorsk was claimed entirely by the Russians. You can see that once again, there's not a whole lot left. There's the Russian flag in Staromayorsk. Let's go and trot up to Kharkiv for a few moments here. The Biden administration's limited policy change permitting Ukraine to use U.S.-provided weapons to strike some Russian military targets in a small area within Russian territory has reduced the size of Russia's ground sanctuary by only 16% at maximum. Take a look at this map right here. These green areas are the coverage areas that the Americans are allowing the Ukrainians to use their weapons in. It's a tiny area just across the front line. Sorry, just across the border. And even so, this is a huge thing. I'm not going to say it's a game changer, but it's a big thing for Ukraine, because now they can prevent the Russians from actually crossing the border by killing them before they ever get there. In addition, a missile strike was carried out on the command post of the Russian 6th Combined Arms Army. That would be in Belgorod State University, where the command post was set up near the village of Shebekino. So this is yet another situation where the Ukrainians are targeting Russia where it hurts. And now they're having to scramble to try and cover their rear areas that were not under threat before. The operation to basically push the Russians back in the Kharkiv region is continuing apace. With looks like the Ukrainians have managed to make some additional progress in Hlebove over in that area. And I'm not sure I got that pronunciation right, but I tried my best there. As Knoll report states, they're still waiting on further confirmation. But overall, it's looking like the Ukrainians are making good progress, pushing the Russians back. There was a bombing in Kharkiv itself, and as you can see, this is kind of the pictures of the damages, continuing to be an issue as Russia has continued to bomb Ukraine, almost with impunity at this point in time with their glide bombs. However, the Ukrainians are not above a little bit of trolling as well. A Ukrainian drone installed a Ukrainian flag on a communications tower in Belgorod region of Russia, letting it fly for all to see. Tindar gives a great summary of the current situation in Kharkiv. Basically gives a good summary of the results, how Russia's gotten bogged down. And from a tactical point of view, Russia didn't make any noteworthy gains, with Volchansk continually being primarily under Ukrainian control, and the Ukrainians regaining some previous parts. The Russian dream to basically create this buffer zone and getting closer to Kharkiv city is basically over. More important, according to Tindar, is the strategic situation. The Russians couldn't break the Ukrainian lines, are now even compelled to defend this area. Far worse are the political implications of that adventure. The biggest Russian miscalculation has been that the West authorized and the usage of Western weapons against Russian targets in Russia, not only exposing countless Russian targets, but also Russian bluffs when it comes to red lines. That felt awkwardly worded. Basically, they thought the West wouldn't allow Ukraine to attack Russian targets in Russia. And that turned out to be false. There's also an assumption that the Kharkiv incursion was a diversion for operations in the east. And indeed, Russians tried multiple times to advance near Chasiv Yar, but the results there were even smaller than before the Kharkiv incursion. The attempted Russian crossing of the Seversky Donetsk Canal failed multiple times, and the Russian armored spearheads along with their manpower were swiftly eliminated. Russians haven't spent all their cannon fodder there yet, but if Kharkiv was a diversion, then this intention failed as well. So overall, the long story short, I guess you might say, is that the Kharkiv offensive, as carried out by Russia, has turned out to not actually accomplish the things they wanted. They're taking smaller bites than they were taking before the Kharkiv offensive. They tried to gamble that they could beat Western assistance to the area, and the gamble didn't pay off. However, according to Dmitry at War Translated, he says that Putin is satisfied with the outcome of his failed Kharkiv offensive, saying just yesterday that there was no new mobilization expected in Russia, which would mean no major offensive operations anytime soon. But he seems content with terrorizing Ukraine with missiles and bombings. A Russian ammunition storage in the Belgorod region was hit and destroyed with secondary explosions. The interesting thing here is if you take a close look, you'll see a civilian neighborhood either near or behind this facility, which means that Russia is once again putting their vital military hardware right into the civilian areas. This headline is, and I will state it straight out, misleading. Ukrainian warplane fires weapon at target inside Russia for first time. However, early in the conflict, there was a Ukrainian aircraft that dropped 1,000-pound bombs on Russian targets in Russia. So I think it's more likely that this is the first time that it's acknowledged that a Western weapon was fired at a target inside Russia for the first time. Now, the UK had been giving authorization to do that for a while, so take it with a grain of salt. Overall, though, this does once again show how much of a boomerang that this Russian Kharkiv incursion has turned into. Ukrainian troops are continuing to gain more ground in northern Volchansk. We're starting to see even more areas being gobbled up by Ukrainian forces, with the greater part of Volchansk under the control of defense forces. Then there's this story. The Russian army claims to have invaded Ukraine's Sumy Oblast from Kursk again, and to have captured the village of Rozivka, with no confirmation from the Ukrainian side as of this report. However, no, that's not it. Hold on, I got to bump around here. Man, I got all kinds of stuff here. Already talked about that. The thing is that the video showing this was published by none other than Kadyrov. And it shows a Russian flag being shown and the Rozivka city council sign, with no other proof the village was captured. The thing is, though, that by announcing the capture of this village, Ukrainian forces put double time on it and went charging in to recapture that village. And President Zelensky has reported that village is now fully back in Ukrainian hands, with the Russian flag destroyed and no enemy presence in the village. Then there's a Russian Telegram channel that picked up on this news and says it's Kadyrov's fault that 20 Russian soldiers of his forces are now dead because he advertised all this stuff, basically poked the bear, except for it was the Ukrainian bear. And now the Ukrainians came flooding in there, kicked them out, and killed a bunch of them. So by announcing it and putting it all on the airwaves, that basically said, I'm now an easy target. And so the Ukraine took advantage of it. And I thought that was interesting. Now let's move on to Crimea. Oh my heavens, Crimea has been hopping, and I've got a lot of duplicate information here. This is from earlier today. Russian sources report that overnight, Ukrainian forces targeted multiple Russian air defense installations in occupied Crimea with U.S.-supplied ATACMS missiles. Two S-300s and 2 or 400 systems, and 4 radars were targeted in Zankoy, Yevpatoria, and Chornomorsk. Let's see if we can get some information on what's going on. For starters, the NASA fire incident reporting map, I don't remember the exact name of it here, confirmed large fires at some facilities in the Vardyevskoye Air Base that does not look like it is just burning grass. There was an S-300 air defense system at the time, which may have been struck. And then Russian sources reported that the Russian 31st Air Defense Division took a severe hit with several casualties. They also claim that the line officers are lying to their superiors about the results. Here's some radar footage showing the potential results of the attack at Zonkoy, showing some of the systems that were destroyed. You can see a large burned area here. More information just kind of showing these attacks. I'm going to just kind of skip through some of it here. Shortly after these attacks, the partisan Atesh movement reported that Russian air defense servicemen have been given the soft order to evacuate their families from occupied Crimea. So they would not evacuate those families unless they thought there was a serious possibility that the Russians might not be able to control that peninsula anymore. On top of that, air defense systems are also being moved from Crimea to Belgorod. This is the first real sign we're seeing that Russia may be giving up on Crimea. They're stripping it of air defenses in some areas because, number one, they're not being effective. They're taking it to places where they think that it'll stand a better chance of being useful for the war. On top of that, by stripping these particular areas, they're basically turning them loose to Ukraine for repeated attacks. And that is big news. Big news. Like rats fleeing a sinking ship. More interesting yet, a Russian ship was likely attacked in the Sea of Azov on June 8th. Around 4 p.m., several non-civilian vessels were spotted off the coast between Berdyansk and Primorsk. A Ukrainian naval drone potentially attacked a Russian ship near Yeysk. Now, I've seen this in multiple places now. This is another type of vessel. It was originally reported that it might have been an amphibious assault ship, but we don't know what kind of ship it is just yet. So Ukraine is really turning up the heat in Crimea. In fact, here's some locals that are on the beach in Crimea watching as a Ka-29 helicopter flies overhead looking for Ukrainian naval drones. That's what we're looking at. That is what Russia's getting paranoid. In other news, Crimea's water situation continues to deteriorate. They had all the reservoirs and things filled by some very effective rain just a while back, but now they're starting to dry up, and there's no sign of additional water coming in. The engineer Smirnov tugboat. Hey, Raymond, glad to have you here. Absolutely glad to have the comment, and feel free to ask questions or make comments as I talk. I do kind of bust through things pretty quick here, keep this pace going, but I want you to know that I do pause and read the comments every chance I can. And yes, Paul, I saw that comment. The engineer Smirnov tugboat pushing the barge Section 179 was struck by Ukrainian drones in the Azov Sea. And if you'll pay attention, you'll see things, literally an explosion, and then items are going to fly over the top of the ship here. There's the explosion, and items have flown over. I believe the barge that it was pushing is what was actually hit. And I can show you what I mean by that, because this appears to be the barge. You can see the damage in the side of the barge right there. Likely not going to sink it, but on the move. That is a target that was on the move. Not fast, but it was on the move and struck by a Ukrainian drone. And that's the situation out of Crimea, and thus all of the front lines. Crazy things going on right now. It was a busy weekend. In fact, I would have probably streamed yesterday with the Su-57 being attacked. Except for on Saturday, I had a little bit of an accident with an axe in the yard, and I managed to injure my foot. Nothing serious. It's just very, 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 very swollen. So I decided yesterday I was too tired to try and do that. So today you're getting all the information from the weekend. Let's go on to the interesting extras. The non-governmental organization Save Ukraine rescued a 17-year-old girl from Russia. Quote, despite a number of difficult challenges, the Save Ukraine team managed to make every effort, and the abducted girl is finally on her native Ukrainian land. They are working hard to bring as many of these kids back home as they can. On this one, this is the side of an air defense unit. Look at all the vehicles that this commander and his crew have shot down. Missiles, Shaheds, other drones, missiles upon missiles. As Anton Herashchenko states, this is what the side of the command and control vehicle of the commander of an anti-aircraft missile unit, Lieutenant Colonel Kirilo Peretieko, looks like. He is a legend of air defense battles. With his team, Lieutenant Peretieko performed 145 missile launches and destroyed 139 targets. These are cruise missiles, KH-101, 55, 555, caliber missiles, and strike drones. Simply impressive. Now, I wanted to share this one for a couple of reasons, but the main one is actually not for the reason it looks like. So let's go ahead and put this into full screen and hit the play button. This is Lindsey Graham talking about Ukraine.
To $12 trillion of critical minerals in Ukraine. They could be the richest country in all of Europe. I don't want to give that money and those assets to Putin to share with China. If we help Ukraine now, they can become the best business partner we ever dreamed of. That $10 to $12 trillion of critical mineral assets could be used by Ukraine and the West, not given to Putin and China. This is a very big deal how Ukraine ends. Let's help them win a war we can't afford to lose. Let's find a solution to this war. But they're sitting on a gold mine to give Putin $10 or $12 trillion of critical minerals that he will share with China is ridiculous. They're sitting on 10 to 12 trillion.
Mike, thank you very much, Robbie. I noticed that as well. I'm sharing this not because I think the argument is good. In fact, I think it's the worst possible argument in favor of Ukraine. The economic argument never sits well with me, ever, because from every other perspective I look at, the cause is just. We promised. The bill is now due, and what would we look like if we ran out on the bill at this point? Russia has declared itself our enemy. I believe all of these are far better justification. But look at it slightly differently. Let's say, and I'm just spitballing here, bear with me a moment. What if Donald Trump gets back into the White House? The moral argument isn't going to make a lick of difference to him. But the economic one absolutely would. So my thought process is he's laying the groundwork for expressing how vital Ukraine can be to the overall situation economically in the world. So if you look at it from the perspective of who his audience is, you see where he's coming from. I don't care about the financial benefits. That's not even part of my calculation here. My calculation is there is a freedom-loving people that wants to be free. And they deserve to be free. They made the deals that guaranteed they'd be free. They gave up their biggest asset in favor of freedom. And now that the bill is due, what kind of people are we if we don't pay the tab? Russia didn't hold up their end of the bargain, but doggone it, if the U.S. doesn't, we will be a sad people indeed. Which is why I hope we do. Sorry, I had to rant for a moment there. This is from eastern Ukraine. A Russian soldier is filming himself in his Bukhanka when his van hit a mine here, and it's clean, nothing to worry about here. And you can see it go over there and see the explosion. There's nothing else to it than that. For those who have been in combat, I'm sure you know what this is like, especially in the Middle East. I have not. But these things are not armored. This is just a van. Getting the IED right to the face. Now, this story is interesting. I don't think it's in English. Let me pop my headphones on here. It's not, so I'll just go ahead and mute this. This is a Ukrainian fighter who was wounded out in a field, and he saw a drone flying overhead. The thing is, he didn't know whose drone it was, but he knew if he didn't do something, he'd probably die there in the field. So he waved it down, showed his Ukrainian ID to the drone, and within an hour, a Bradley fighting vehicle arrived and successfully evacuated him from the field. The Ukrainians don't leave theirs behind if there's any way they can avoid it. They fight hard to make sure they don't. And when they've got somebody alive out there, they're going to find a way to get them. Two Ukrainian Mi-24 attack helicopters attacking Russian positions in the Avdiivka sector. They're often using unguided rockets that they fire at a specific angle to launch it into the area. And then, of course, they turn around before they are directly attacked by manpads and equivalent air defense missiles. But you can see them. That was the missile launch right at the beginning. And as soon as they launch, they start firing the countermeasures, the flares, so that the typically infrared guided missiles will be distracted away from them and they can get away clean. This one I found interesting because it's showing that not everybody agreed that the Budapest Memorandum was the way to go. In 1993, John Mearsheimer argued that Ukraine should not give up its nuclear arsenal. The Russian aggression is highly likely, he said. The Western security guarantees are almost empty, and the conventional parity is too hard to reach. So, stay nuclear, Ukraine, he said. Now, Ukraine had a bunch of other situations going on at the same time. Number one, they were dead flat broke. So part of the deal, as I recall, was that the Russians would forgive their debt in exchange for the nuclear weapons and the airplanes and things like that. So there was more than one motivation for doing so. But look at the results. They could be holding nuclear weapons right now. And would Russia have invaded then? Maybe. This is a fun little one. I got to mute this for music here. But if you see this little drone here, he is actually recovering a machine gun that's normally used to transport ammunition and provisions to their positions. But they spotted this machine gun buried in the dirt and recovered it. And I believe it's a Russian machine gun. They hauled it back to use themselves. Probably not, though. They did find it and bring it back. Quite the grand theft of drone auto. And here, I just thought this was a very pretty video here. Barely see it in the background, and then all of a sudden you see that barrel appear, and off drives the Leopard tank. The Germans really know how to make a beautiful tank. This is just the second to last right here. This was a dog who served the Ukrainian military. Name was Vasya, or Vasya, I believe, with the correct pronunciation. He has passed away. You can see that he had some injuries from his time in the service. He actually got entangled in a wire near militant positions and bit off his own paw to escape and return to his master's lines. That is dedication. But don't worry, it's not all downers today. I'm going to mute this again for music. Andre and Rim were at Azovstal together. They were taken into captivity and shared his 330 grams of food between them. Then Rim was able to return home, and Andre spent many more months in captivity. Now Andre is finally home, and he and his dog are together again. Isn't that so happy? Just excited to see his master. And that's everything for today. Thank you again so much for joining me. I'm really glad you guys were here. Great stream today, and I always appreciate you guys being on board. On that note, if you enjoyed today's stream, found some of these things interesting, or just love seeing the dog, happy to see his master, hit me with that old thumbs up. Subscribe to the channel if you are new here, because I absolutely would appreciate that as well. You have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next video.